So we've been hearing talk about VR coming to Nintendo Switch for quite some time, whether it's people asking or reporters asking Reggie himself, or even finding some supposed code for VR in the Nintendo Switch itself as of last year. But it seems like these rumors are finally coming to a head, because just today, Nintendo World Report ran an article by Emily Rogers, who mentioned that according to multiple sources, she'd been hearing that VR is coming to the Switch perhaps this year, and along with that, a selection of first-party titles would be compatible with it. Now, shortly after this article ran, Go Nintendo followed up with a report of their own, saying that, according to them, this will actually be Labo VR. So it's actually going to be, so it'll be VR, but within the Labo universe, which is pretty interesting for a number of reasons. So I figured we'd have a little chat about this, get our thoughts out there about what we think about VR coming to Switch. So I guess first off, do you believe these rumors? And secondly, are you surprised by them? Like, do you think VR coming to Switch makes sense?
Yeah, I think the fact that it's in the Switch's actual firmware, it makes it seem like it's definitely coming. But I don't think this can compete with PlayStation VR and Oculus though, because if it is just a Labo product, then it's pretty much the Switch equivalent of Google Cardboard. And that's cool for like testing VR, but it's not great for long experiences. So I'm just a bit worried about if this is actually going to be a reliable VR product, or just something you play with for a little bit and then never really touch again.
Like the rest of Labo.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. That's pretty much exactly how I feel, John. You nailed it. I mean, it doesn't exactly surprise me because it does exist in the firmware. But I was thinking of Google Cardboard as well, and this seems to be the usual Nintendo pattern of them trying to, get their audience to buy into some cool new tech at a lower price and fidelity than what the competition offers. So I don't think this is going to come anywhere close to PlayStation VR, but it might work as a low cost kind of VR light VR alternative.
Yeah, I mean, I think you pretty much nailed it. As you said, John, this is basically Google Cardboard, so this already exists. I think Google Cardboard takes all of 5 minutes to set up, so this might be the easiest Labo project ever, as compared to the hours Ash and I spent building all those other contraptions.
God.
But I think this is a pretty clever idea. Like, I think it's something a lot of people thought about when they first saw Labo. It's like, yeah, you can make VR with this pretty easily, seeing as how Google already did. And as you guys mentioned, this is pretty much like a budget entry version into VR. You're not going to have independent head tracking or arm tracking. You're not going to have like a high resolution display. In fact, the resolution for the Nintendo Switch screen being 720p means each eye is only going to get, I believe, 640 by 720, which isn't exactly great. That's right around the resolution of the very first development kit for Oculus, which of course was never available to the public. That was pretty much just a like early adopter type thing. But when you look at it as just kind of like a fun little toy to maybe play around with VR and some, with some loose mini games that they come with for Labo plus support for existing titles, I could see this being just a really fun, accessible option to try it out as kind of like your first entry into VR. So I'm actually excited by this because I can't imagine this costing a whole lot, even by Labo standards. Maybe 20 to 30 bucks, hopefully. And yeah, if you throw in support for existing games, Mario Kart occurred to me earlier, because Mario Kart 7 had a first-person mode, which seems like it'd be perfect to adopt for Mario Kart 8, and plus Mario Kart is already in VR with an arcade version in Japan, London, I think it came to New York as well briefly, if not permanently. I'm not quite sure if it's still there. In fact, yeah, actually even tried that, so we can talk about that later too.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, I mean, I have wanted to see Nintendo do VR. Even if it's not a high-end option, this is exciting, but the Switch does seem like a pretty good fit for it. The screen would slot right into the VR or into the Labo contraption. The Joy-Cons themselves already operate as kind of motion controllers, so again, it won't have that one-to-one tracking, but it should be good enough for some for some limited circumstances.
Yeah, I agree, and I'm also thinking of Breath of the Wild, just because it's so intensely atmospheric. Having that, even in a VR light setting, could really be, not necessarily a game changer, but it could really bring a whole new dimension to the experience.
Yeah, the performance worries me a little bit, though, because Breath of the Wild can get a bit framey at times, especially in like the Korok Forest. It's like, how's that going to work in VR? Like, is it just going to hurt us?
Yeah.
Like, is it going to hurt our heads just playing Breath of the Wild in VR? Because as Andre said, the screen quality is already not great, but the Switch isn't exactly a powerhouse. It's not something I would necessarily put side by side with VR. And yeah, like the built-in Labo games could work quite well if they're quite simple and just pick up and play accessible. But when it comes to like broader Nintendo software, that's when I start to worry a little bit about the capability of this. And yeah, Mario Kart's a great choice, but yeah, I think Breath of the Wild might just be a little bit too ambitious for VR.
Yeah, I think I found even with PSVR, like the simpler games tend to look better, and luckily Nintendo kind of excels at that kind of art style.
Yeah.
You know, with the not necessarily undetailed graphical style, but definitely not. You know, they're not going for photorealism. I think that will benefit them here. So for the Labo games, I fully expect a lot of like bright objects. You know, maybe simple shapes.
I just got an idea. Nintendo Land VR. Have little mini games based off all these Nintendo franchises. VR Star Fox. VR Metroid Prime, have like you can look up in Talon 4 and just see the water go into your visor. I don't know what else, like VR, just like bring back some of the like Nintendo Land games, bring up Mario Chase but put it in VR. That'd just be a great opportunity to do like little mini games, but with our favorite Nintendo properties. And the art style would probably work quite well in VR, I think.
That is kind of genius. If you combine that with a second Switch, you're basically doing the whole Wii U approach, right? You got one person in their own screen, an own little world, literally, and then everyone else could play on the second Switch on the TV. You could do some really maybe crazy things with this. Like imagine a Metroid game where instead of playing on the gamepad, you're controlling that spaceship from a first-person perspective or something.
I'm also thinking, you know, a slightly less talked about Nintendo game that I think might really benefit from VR is ARMS, because of the perspective. You know, you're already kind of, you know, directly behind your character at all times and kind of, you know, looking at your opponent head on. It does have that kind of simplistic, bright art style that you guys were talking about. And, you know, it might breathe a little new life into a game that it doesn't feel like that many people are paying attention to anymore.
I could see them adding like a first-person mode to ARMS in order to make that work.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And the Joy-Cons already have proven themselves to work perfectly for that game.
Here's another idea for a game. We actually saw a Labo gun in the Labo trailer, and that we have no sign of that releasing. So what if the Labo VR kit actually comes with a few accessories? So a lot of VR games do revolve around shooting, because a lot of them are in first person. So what if we had the VR kit with the Labo gun, and they'd give us VR Duck Hunt?
Oh man!
Oh my god! Actually, that would be a killer title. I think. I mean, I'm serious. I think that'll get a lot of attention. Like a lot of people will be like, "Holy crap! I want to play Duck Hunt in VR, where you can rotate in you know real space in order to get like a 360-degree view of the world." That would be really neat. I'm totally down with this, John. I love that idea.
I love that. I'm thinking that Mario Clash now needs a Labo VR remake, because that, of course, it was a one-and-done thing on the Virtual Boy, and that would be a fun little nod to their first failed VR venture, even though they'll never do it.
I've been saying for years that the 3DS was the only platform that really made sense for the Virtual Boy. If VR comes to Nintendo Switch, that's no longer the case, and now is the time to finally update those Virtual Boy games. Put them in color. Imagine Wario. I mean, Wario Land is an underrated gem, and something that most people haven't played with it being on Virtual Boy. Yeah, update that. Put that in color on Switch and Labo VR. That could be perfect. And also, by the way, we were talking about how low the resolution of the Switch would be for VR. It is still about double what the Virtual Boy's resolution was, so there you go.
Exactly.
I'm just excited for the potential of this, because I said before that while playing Astrobot, which was my game of the year last year, it felt like a Nintendo game in VR. Like, it felt like a game Nintendo would make if they had access to a VR platform. And now that Nintendo might finally have access to one, I'm excited to see what they can do with this. Whether, you know, as a single-player experience or combining it with other Switches for a more multiplayer-focused experience, like whether with Nintendo Land or if everyone has their own, you know, their own Nintendo Labo VR setup. And also, John, getting back to your accessory idea, they could even loop in existing Labo accessories, such as if they add Mario Kart support, they already have that steering wheel and gas pedal from the flying kit or from the vehicle kit that would work perfectly.
That's a great point. Another game that actually came to mind was Luigi's Mansion 3. Luigi's Mansion's always been a property that they've experimented with 3D, and there's already a first-person arcade machine. So what if they have like this side VR mode that they use the ideas of the arcade machine, but sort of put it into the main Luigi's Mansion 3 game. I just think that worked really well, because that's quite an atmospheric franchise, and it's one of Nintendo's sort of more exploratory games, and I think that would work quite well in VR, because there's not a whole lot going on. And they could probably just keep those static either fix cameras or just keep you in first person the entire time.
I really love that idea, because I don't know if either of you have played Luigi's Mansion Arcade, but there's an incredibly satisfying, like, rumble force feedback, because you're holding this vacuum controller, this poltergust controller, and when you suck up ghosts, you get this really satisfying, like
thunk.
jolt, like this, as it's going into the vacuum, and we know that the Joy-Con can really, can reproduce different rumble experiences using HD rumbles, so combining all that with a VR side mode for Luigi's Mansion could be really cool.
Oh, I'm right there with you. I was thinking exactly that. I want a cardboard poltergust that you can connect the Joy-Cons into in order to complete the experience. Yeah, the arcade game's actually pretty fun. And it's partly because of that tactile feedback you get that really sells the illusion of you going around a mansion sucking up these ghosts. So yeah, like a little side mode like that could be fun. Or again, that could be part of like a new Nintendo Land experience part of a new Nintendo Land. Yeah, so are we all pretty on board with this idea? Like, if this came to Switch, do you think you would pick it up?
I think so. There's more appeal to this. With all the other Labo products, they were all very self-contained, and they're fun to make. But I've never used them outside of Labo. And in fact, I bought the vehicle kit, and I played around with it for maybe a week, and it's just stayed in my closet the entire time. It's a good concept, it's a fun concept. But I think Labo VR has a bit more has more legs than all the other kits. So I am quite excited for it. I'm more excited for how they're going to apply it to their games than the actual hardware, because I can't imagine this being like the go-to VR experience.
Yeah,
but there's definitely a lot of fun they can have with it, though.
For me, I'm a little more on the fence about it. For me, it comes down to two things: price and footprint. Because, if it's like an $80 Labo kit somehow, then I'm not going to go for this. But, as you were saying, Andre, if it's like, more moderately priced, like $30, I'd go for that, as long as it doesn't leave a huge footprint in my apartment like every other Labo kit does. Because, as you know, Andre, when we were putting together all those Labo kits when they first came out, you just have cardboard stuff lying around everywhere now. It takes up so much space.
I know, even more so, but I had to package the stupid things to bring up to Seattle with me in my move that I just made.
So,
I have a whole box full. I have a cardboard box full of more cardboard. It's pretty ridiculous.
So yeah, I mean, if it was like just the mask or the whatever you need to view through, and it wasn't just a bunch of different pieces, and it was moderately priced, I'd be totally in. But it has to kind of hit those two factors for me, I think.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that. I because I really don't want even more Labo cardboard that to hold on to. So I'm cool with maybe just a headset and the Luigi vacuum if that happens, the poltergust. But yeah, so I haven't quite enjoyed like the VR experiences that I've played. So as one who wants to see Nintendo go in on VR, this excites me. Even if it doesn't go to the same extent I would love them to, with a full proper VR headset, full like motion track controllers, like 1-to-1 for instance. But I think this is a good baby step for them, and most importantly, it's accessible. Like, if it comes in at a pretty cheap cost, this could potentially be the biggest VR platform. Because the biggest barriers are cost. The cost of entry into these things, they're expensive. Even PSVR, which is by far, or maybe not by far, but I believe it is still the cheapest of the bunch. It's still pretty pricey because you need the headset, you usually need the controllers, the trackable controllers. So yeah, this might not be a bad way of going about an entry point for VR, and then hopefully Nintendo can expand upon it down the line with maybe a more dedicated product, or even if they end up making a Switch Pro with a higher resolution screen, that would help to solve some of the image quality issues that are going to come up with this existing model. Okay, so before we wrap it up here though, Ash, I know you had some experience by playing the Mario Kart arcade game in VR. Maybe 6 months ago, maybe a year ago now. It's been a while.
Yeah.
And we never had the chance to properly talk about it. So I was curious to get your thoughts on how Mario Kart worked in VR, and whether you think it could work for Mario Kart 8, for instance, on a albeit simpler scale.
Right. So it was pretty interesting. I played it back in June of last year, so it's been, in between the two periods you mentioned, and it was an interesting but very one-and-done experience. So you're essentially sitting in one of 4 carts, and your 4 playable characters, I believe, are Mario, Luigi, Peach, and Yoshi. And, you put on the headset, you're sitting in the cart, and you can literally look around, to the sides and behind you to see the other, your other opponents, and look around the environment, which is really cool. And then you start going, and basically you're holding, of course, these hand-tracking controllers, and you physically reach out to item boxes to grab them, which is kind of really cool, kind of a, feedback type thing. And I believe that you can there's shells, banana peels, and I think a hammer item that's exclusive to that game. and you literally throw the shells and throw the banana peels, and you can kind of swing the hammer up and down, and it's a really cool kind of different take on Mario Kart, but still just familiar enough for people who've already played it to know what they're doing. And then I guess the only issue is that it is one combined track of various kind of generic Mario environments. So you've got outside Peach's castle, you've got, a few of Bowser's airships, things like, Bowser's castle, things like that. So nothing you haven't seen before environmentally, but, it is cool to do it. It's like $20 per game, so once you've done it, it's not the kind of thing where you have to go through and be like, I didn't notice this last time and gotta try this. It's very much a one and done experience, and I feel like that could be expanded upon in a possible Mario Kart 8 VR mode.
Yeah, that sounds like it. So do you think, so if it came to VR, if it came to Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, do you think it would be applied to the main game, or do you think they would focus on an exclusive mode? Maybe where you can use like the motion controls, as you mentioned, in your VR experience to actually throw the items yourself. But I think that'd be a big part of it, right? Like being able to actually like throw the shell in VR in order to kind of get the sense that you're actually there.
Right, and I would imagine for that reason that it might be its own side mode, only because I don't, I'm not an engineer, but I can imagine the amount of effort required to go back and prepare every single track in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe for VR would be a pretty huge undertaking, so I would imagine this would be maybe relegated to its own side mode.
So is that something that would excite you, though? Like, would you be excited for it?
Yeah, I think so. Again, it depends on the price point. Like, I wouldn't pay $80 to $100 to get into that, but, $30? Sure. It was something, again, I paid $20 for it once, and I didn't feel the need to do it again, but if I just had it on hand any time to do it whenever I wanted, and if there was more than one track to play, then absolutely. It would have to be more than one track for me to be really interested, I think.
Well, guys, any final thoughts you want to get out there, or are we about done?
I was looking at other Labo products that were in the debut trailer, and it wasn't just the gun. There's a camera, too. So, what if we have VR Pokémon Snap?
Oh my god.
Man.
That would be incredible, actually.
That game's on rails, right? Like, it's all about just looking around and just sort of taking pictures of things. That's perfect for VR.
You're totally right. You're actually totally right. It was built for VR, because, yeah, the whole game's about just spinning around in place as the vehicle takes you around and just taking pictures. What a chill experience that would be. And the vehicle goes slow enough, too, that it shouldn't be much of a problem with motion sickness, hopefully, so...
that would be really cool. That makes me think of a question for you, Andre. What's the most you would pay for a Labo VR that comes with a Stunt Race FX VR experience?
Stunt Race VR.
Let's not get into that territory. People will judge me for how much I would pay for that experience.
Right?
You just like build like a cardboard car to sit in as well.
Yeah, sure. Just sit in. I'd sleep in that car. What are you talking about? Oh, man. Real quick, I just had something that came to mind as well. I believe it was in the book Nintendo Magic. There may have been a different book, some Nintendo history book, where they mentioned that Nintendo, when they're making Virtual Boy, one of the reasons, I'm sure of several, they decided not to make it a device you would actually wear on your head, was they were actually afraid of kids like getting hurt doing this, whether it was like running into traffic or like falling down stairs. And I wonder if that's a factor that's still taking into account. Because Labo does tend to gear younger, much younger, and it makes you wonder, like, how they might be positioning Nintendo Labo VR for kids. Like, are they going to focus entirely on sit-down experiences, so that kind of mitigates the risk factor, or do you think they're just not too concerned now with VR becoming more widespread?
That's quite a legitimate issue, actually, because with PlayStation VR, there are so many wires, that thing is not portable. Especially because you have to be tethered to the PlayStation 4. But with the Switch, you can just put that in and take it anywhere. So I guess that is kind of a concern with this. But then again, I don't think there have been that many reports of people doing that with Google Cardboard. So maybe they'll take precedent off that. But yeah, I guess it is an actual concern.
Yeah, and I would imagine Nintendo would want to do everything they can to ensure as safe a product as possible, because Labo at this point, I don't think you can rebrand it as something that skews older. Like, Labo is very much, and has, to this point, clearly been branded as something that skews to younger kids. So I don't think that would necessarily change for Labo VR. So I'm sure they have to do anything they can to kind of punch things up on the safety end of things. But as you said, John, we haven't heard much in the way of, safety disasters happening with Google Cardboard.
You kind of brought up a good point there, Ash. The fact that this is still Labo branded kind of tells us what Nintendo... it kind of already tells us a lot about how they're going to position Labo VR, I think. in that it is still going to gear younger. I'm reasonably confident. It's supporting existing games will be fun for, maybe parents who are buying it for their kids, or, people are kids at heart, as Nintendo said in the original trailer. But it tells me that Nintendo isn't necessarily aiming this, like, they're not taking this as seriously, perhaps, as PlayStation is with VR. Like, I don't expect a ton of custom experiences outside of the games that come with it, and maybe some support for existing games. I don't think we'll see, like, a full-scale, VR exclusive game, as long as Labo is attached to that title, or is attached to the product.
Yeah, totally agreed.
Also, too, I think just with the limitations of the Switch's hardware being that it's not going to have that one-to-one tracking, it's naturally going to be more suited to sitting or standing experiences in which you only spin in place. So yeah, that might be another factor in it not being too concerned about, or with Nintendo not being too concerned about kids hurting themselves. So.
Right.
Though I guess it could be a bit like the robot kit, where you put a Joy-Con in your visor and it tracks the motion that way. But then that would also limit how a lot of games will play, because they need 2 sets of Joy-Con to actually play those games.
Actually, I believe I'm pretty sure the Switch already contains motion control hardware inside it, so I don't think it would even need to
that's
use a
true.
Joy-Con for the headset.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I forgot about that.
Yeah, I know, because very few games actually use it, I think. So,
Right.
and how often do you want to be tilting the Switch by itself without using the Joy-Con? And with that, I think we're about done here, so thank you so much for watching, and let us know what your thoughts are on Nintendo VR, or Labo VR, I should say, in the comments below. And of course, stay tuned to GameXplain for more on Labo VR once it's official, if it becomes official, and everything else Nintendo Switch as well. We'll catch you later. Bye.